videos in this, and you could, I'm telling you because I have to move the camera and do all those kind of things that are fun, guys, especially if you're new to sewing. So that's it for this video. It's your size so that you can lay it in one. Hi everyone, it's Denise with Wondubar Crafts. We're back today to finish up this tote, this June Tailor grocery tote, and shopping tote. And the instructions only gave you an amount, a fabric amount to use to cut your binding. I think the reason why they didn't tell you how much or how the length is because some people have personal preference on what size binding they like. I prefer 2 1/4 on my binding unless the quilt is thick, uses a thicker batting, then I might use a 2 1/2 or 3. So that gave you plenty of yardage to be able to cut it to the size that you want. I, however, am going to cut mine, have cut mine at 2 1/4. And to determine the length, what I did, and I already know the measurements, but what I did was I took my tape measure and I just used these little clips and clipped it down, and then just laid it flat and clipped it every, 6, 8, 10 inches, however many inches you want, whatever you're comfortable with, and got it all the way around to meet up to here. And for me, it was 44 1/2 inches. It could be more, it could be less, depending on how well you sewed your seams. No biggie if it's 45 instead of 44 3/4 or what have you, okay? Just measure it out. So knowing that my fabric strip is only about 42 after you cut the selvage, I need at least 2 strips. You could cut it, like, cut your strip and then cut another strip in half if you so choose. But to do the continuous seam on the binding, I try to give myself plenty of space. Some people will measure it and then cut it I don't like to do that because, and the reason is, when you use your walking foot and you set it down, you could lay it perfect and end up using maybe a 1/4 inch more, and if you cut it precise like that, you could end up being short to do your binding. So I've got my 2 strips here. I'm going to take you over a sewing machine and show you how to attach these so that they're one big piece and how to make the binding. Okay, so we have our 2 pieces, and if you're using directional, make sure that your pieces lay out in the same direction. This kind of goes up and down. I'm sure there's probably a directional pattern for it, but I noticed that the flowers go up, they go down, the vining, all that stuff, so I'm not too concerned with it. So I'm going to lay one face up with your right side up, and then take your second strip and just right over the top where the corners meet, okay, with your second piece with your the right side matching or facing the right side of your other piece. You're going to turn it, and from your first piece, this inside section right here, we're going to go from this inside corner down to the outside corner over here, and you're just going to do, let's see, let me turn it down, 1.8, and this is why I have this line, so that I can keep it, I know that this is my center point right here. And I use a 1.8 millimeter so that way my binding doesn't come apart. All right, easy peasy lemon squeezy. Then I'm just going to come in and cut this piece off to give myself a 1/4 inch seam. Go back to the ironing board and finish ironing the binding. Okay, so now I have my seam here, and what I'm going to do is I like to open my seam on my binding. You can do it to one side or the other. I prefer to open mine. I think it lays flatter and nicer, but it's personal preference. All right, so making the binding, it's very, very simple. You're just gonna fold it in half. Now, if you can cut yours on the bias. I only do that with certain things, like a bigger quilt. I might cut my binding on a bias, but normally I just cut it just like a normal strip. These were already pre-cut strips for this, so it just made it easier. I just needed to cut it down to a 2 1/4 because they were 2 1/2. So you're just gonna fold it in half so that your seams meet with your right sides out. And there are tools that you can get. Let me show you. This is a June Tailor Binding Express. It does 2 1/4, 2 1/2, and 2-inch strips. And essentially what you would do is, let me see if I can remember how this is done. Oh, you just feed it, you fold it in half and feed it through the, and this is one of the reasons why I don't like it. I'm quicker doing it on the ironing board. But if you want to make sure it's precise, you would pull it here, and as it goes to the area that's not already ironed, it would fold it in half, and you would just pull it onto the ironing press here and just iron it. For a small piece like this is great, but when you're doing a big queen size, king size, even a twin, it's time consuming. So for me, it's not that quick. I'm much quicker at doing it myself. So I just do it this way. I'm just kind of finger pressing it down. You can go either direction. There isn't any right or wrong with which direction you go. The important thing is just to get it folded in half. And you can sew both pieces and cut it down. If you are going to cut it, do not cut it to the length that you measured for the inside of your tote. I would suggest giving yourself at least another 6 to 8 inches additional if you're wanting to cut it down, or if you just have a few pieces, measure the inside of your tote and add 8 inches. Give yourself a little bit of space, and then that way if you're piecing your binding with excess strips that you have left over from doing the tote and you want to use the binding, that you want to use that fabric for your binding, that's what I would suggest. Okay, so our binding is made. Very, very easy. And what we're going to do with our tote is we're going to sew it to the outside, and then it's going to attach to the inside. So we need to make sure that our tote looks right side out. Okay, I pinned down my handles here. Get that little clip, it's gonna drive me nuts, that little thread. And one thing I did do is when I did put on the straps, the instructions tell you after you get your binding on to come in and do your second X on the upper. I did it when I did my binding. It doesn't get in the way so long as I pin it back, so it's not a problem. All right, so with our binding, this is what I like to do, and you can do it any way you so choose. All right, I want my binding to kind of start right in the center. Right, this is where I'm going to attach the binding piece so that I have one continuous piece. So I use a pin and I mark, and I just, that's where I'm gonna attach. This is the start of your binding. Take a ruler and I measure 6 inches. You can do 5 if you think you can but 6 is good because you're going to need that excess to be able to attach the binding together. And then I just pin it. Doesn't have to be exactly 6, but right about. You can do 8 if you want, 9 if you prefer. All right, so that is where I'm going to start my sewing. This is just holding my piece down. This is where I'm going to begin my sewing. You can just take it right to the machine and sew it if you want, if you've done binding before and you're okay with it. I like to clamp it kind of in place. I find I go much slower this way and I get a better result with my binding. It looks much prettier. One nice thing about these, we don't have to deal with mitered corners or anything of the like. It's just straight on. And I like that. You don't have to put a ton on them, just a few here and there, just to hold it up. Maybe every, 6 inches or so. 6, 8. Okay, so now put this one up a little bit more. I'm very close to where the start of my binding is. Right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna lay it, and then I am going to mark, I'm gonna pin where my binding starts. I'm gonna measure back 6 inches and I'm gonna place another pin that is gonna tell me where to stop sewing. Then with my excess, what I can do is I can just fold it up. I keep this excess, I don't cut it yet. The only reason why is sometimes if you're under a walking foot or you think you measured it correctly, you might need that little bit extra. So I have it here and I don't have to worry about. I do the same thing with my quilts. I typically cut my binding a little extra, that way you're less likely to have any oopsies. All right, so now we're gonna go and sew this binding onto the tote. All right, so we're back at the machine. Yesterday when I was sewing, I had some skipping, and so I took apart everything and cleaned it really good. It was still gave me a little bit of skipping, so I changed my needle, brand new needle, haven't had an issue. So there you go. So first one is the start. The second needle is where I'm going to start my sewing, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam. It is not a scant, just a 1/4 inch seam. And then I'm going to take it up to, I'm going to do 2.5, and then I'm going to get a little back stitch. This allows me to keep it straight, keep my fabric managed. Fall off. That's okay. I really like this binding method best because it's kind of like a hidden, you can't tell where it starts and stops. So instead of trying to fold over your ends and fold them over, kind of can get bulky there. We are almost done, guys. Isn't that great? All right, so I'm going to fold this little piece back here that I had where all my fabric is attached with my clip. See here, I'm just going to pull it back, and then I'm going to sew up to my needle. Give it a little back stitch. And then This is where the magic begins. I'm going to take my clip off for my excess. All right. So let me see. Are you guys going to be able to see this on camera? Let me resituate this so you guys can get a really good, clear view of how this works. So I need to zoom the camera out, and to do so, I need to stop it. All right, I haven't figured out all the commands on this thing, so I'm not really sure. I'll have to look into. I think there is a way that you can zoom in and out when you're doing it. Okay, so here is the end of my binding, and here is the beginning. So what I'm going to do is take my ruler, taking a marking pen. You can use, you know, water or air. You're not going to be able to see that mark once it's flipped over. Take my pin out, and I am just going to kind of, I'm not going to pull it. I'm just going to pull it a little bit. I'm going to pull it taut. Then I'm going to repin it. And the reason is this will help when you go to attach your binding, that it's nice and smooth and you don't get like a pucker in there because there was too much fabric. Now my binding is 2 1/4, so I'm going to measure in 2 1/4 from the end of the beginning of my binding, and I'm just going to make a little mark here. Okay, now this end, I'm going to pull it, same thing, not too tight. I just want to pull it taut, and I'm going to find that mark. I'm going to lay it flat where it needs to be sewn, pull it a little taut, and mark it. I probably should use the blue. Okay, now I can take my scissors. Now I can cut it right straight up. And I have my excess, goes into my scrap bin. I have a bin for excess binding, because sometimes I'll attach it and just, you know, when I do fun projects or scrappy whatever. So, all right. Now you can use a pin for this. I don't use a pin. I've done it enough that I don't need to. The end of your binding, you're gonna open it so it lays flat and face up. Your right side is facing upward. You're gonna take the beginning. Okay, what I normally do is scrunch this in. This is why you leave all that excess, so you have room. Okay, so here is the beginning, and I'm gonna open it up, make sure it's not twisted, and lay it right over the top, just like when we put our binding together. Now, to make sure you sew it the correct way, you're from the end of your binding, okay, coming down the end, this is where you want to start, in this corner, and then take it straight across to the end, to the beginning part of your binding, where that corner is right there. So now you could pin this and lay it flat. I just use my fingers. I'm going to decrease my stitch length to 1.8. I'm going to line this up against my tape. This is another reason why I like to put this tape out here, so you can kind of see what you need to do. It's really helpful. And just sew a diagonal all the way across. Okay, I'm going to return my stitch length before I forget. Now, before I cut this piece, I'm going to lay it to make sure that I don't have it's not all gathered somewhere or it's too loose. If it was, I would rip it out, remeasure it again, and re-sew it. So now I can take this, lay that flat, and yes, I'm gonna cut me a 1/4 inch seam allowance, about 1/4 inch from the seam. Doesn't have to be exact and precise. No, I do not open it. What I'm going to do on this one is I'm just going to finger press it. You can finger press it open, I suppose, if you wanted. And then fold it back over. Finger press it again. Now your binding should lay nice and flat, and you shouldn't have any gapping. We're going to start right where we ended. Give it a little back stitch and continue sewing to where we started. Now you got one nice seamless piece of binding. I do this on all my quilts. It makes it look so much nicer. I don't have any puckering or gapping or anything like that. Back stitch at the end. Now our binding is attached. So now I want to show you guys what I do to kind of make it smooth so it'll lay nice and flat without having to clip it together on the other side. All right, back over to the ironing board. Now before we turn this inside out to do the other side, I take an iron and I'm gonna go from the, let's see if I can do this backwards. I'm going to push this binding upward. This gets out any creases and I don't get any pinching. It'll lay nice and flat. This is hard to do with it backwards, but I'm going to do that all the way around. Okay, all the way around. See if I can do it sideways here. And this will help it flip over and lay nicer. Okay, I got some threads in here. Clip those while I'm at it. It's much easier when it's facing you to do. It's just a little awkward to try and do it on camera. All right, so we're all the way around. Now we're gonna flip our bag inside out again, because now we're gonna attach it to the front of the bag. You could do it the other way. If you prefer your binding that way, you can do it the other way. But I think I do my quilts that way, where I attach them to the front, sew them to the back, attach to the front. I think they look nicer. If you get a really nice mitered corner, they look so pretty, I think. All right, so my pin came out, so let me reattach my pin here to my strap. All right. Now I'm going to pull this forward. And then what we're going to do is pull it out and over, okay? And then we just take the iron and just kind of give it, it doesn't have to be a massive crease. It is a little more difficult for me to do this backwards. But this is what you're going to do all the way around it, so that it kind of, it's not setting a crease in there. You're just laying it so when you go to take it back to the machine to sew it, it will lay nicer. You're pulling it out to pull any tucks or anything, any gathers. That's one thing that's frustrating, is you get done with the binding and realized, oh, I have a tuck back there. Now I got to rip all that out, try and rip it far enough back to get the tuck out, and just added work. Okay, I don't like all this string here. I'm going to clip this. Normally I would tuck this up and in, but it's pretty long. So I'm going to get rid of that. Like I said, you don't need to leave it on there for long. Just press it over. Doesn't need to be a crease, like a sharp edge crease, military crease. Just make sure you go all the way around with it. Pulls it all the way out. Okay, then now we're going to go sew it down to the tote. Okay, so I like to start right here at my seam area, and I am going to sew this. My foot it's marked on the same direction on either, so I'm going to put this marking right next to the seam, or the end, not the seam, but the end of the binding. That's going to give me about 1/8 of an inch from the bottom of the binding. All right, so this will keep it nice and even all the way around. Some people do 1/4 inch from the top. Some people will do 5/8 of an inch from the top to get the same, you know, look. I don't like to do 1/4 inch here because sometimes that's a lot of thickness that you're trying to go through. And sometimes it will hit the binding on the back side so it doesn't look even. So I just do it this way. I think it looks nicer. A little back stitch. You can pin this or clip it, you know, put the binder clips back on it to hold it in place. I prefer just to use my fingers. I'm just managing my fabric so it lays nice and flat for me. Tucking in all these little threads. You can go down and clip them. To me, that's just more time that you have to spend doing something, so I just tuck them. And since we kind of press it over, it's going to lay nicer. It's going to lay where I want it to. Almost there, y'all. Just tuck in those threads. Kind of like cat claw them in. Any ones that are sticking out, you just kind of push them down, get them to lay down. Oh, I see the end. We're almost done. Stitch where I began, and as you can see, hopefully you guys can see this, here's where my binding is. The stitch line is just below it instead of on top of it. If I did 1/4 inch, it would be stitching here, off, up, off, you know, and I just think it looks nicer when it sits below the actual binding and not on the binding. So let's go and flip it right side up and see what the end result looks like. All right, now we are ready to flip our bag back. So give it some form. And we can get rid of our handle pins without sticking ourselves, hopefully. All right, so this is our end result. I think it looks just so pretty. I'm gonna clip my little threads here. A little thread here. And my start and end there. And then let's see, where is my, here it is. I got this little tool. It's from R&K. It helps, like, especially if you do a lot of projects that require you to, you know, if you flip a seam and they're thick, this has a little ball on the end of it, and it really helps to push out the seam. So that's all I do is just run it in here, above and below the seam, in those little sewed up corners over here, so that my point sticks out. All right, and if you want it a little bit sharper in the corners, you could stitch down that, but personally I think you're going to want the access. If you stitch it there and you've got something that's a little bulky, you're not going to be able to, the tote's not going to conform to whatever you need it to. So, and remember, these are a little thicker because I did quilt them. I added an extra layer of batting and then also another backing for it, a inner liner for that. So then you can just open it and set it like that. It is a little bit wonky. Like I said, you could sew down maybe a small section in here, but personally I like it this way because if I have something that's, you know, a little bit, makes it a little bit wider, I'm not pulling at my seams over here. All right, so the last thing to do is to put the little plastic piece in the bottom. They do come with, it's like the little plastic bottom, it's a sheet. I find that they come a little big. So what I do is I will pop it in here, and I like to put that liner or that piece right so that it sits underneath those corner seams on the bottom, so that it sits, that seam keeps it in place. So right now it's about 1/2 inch too long. So what I do is I will use I have another rotary blade that I use for cutting other stuff, not fabrics. And so what I'll do is I'll come in and measure this on my cutting board and take a 1/2 inch, and then I'm going to score it about 3 times and then just break it. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, I don't know if you guys can see, but I did score it, and I just I measured it with my ruler, kept my ruler against it, and ran the cutter 3 times over it, and then I just push it back and it pops right off. See? So now I can fit it back in here to determine whether or not it fits. It's a little bit longer on the sides than I want, so I'm gonna go in and take another, I do 1/2 inch increments till I'm happy with the size. So let me go finish that up and we'll test it out and see what it looks like. Go. Okay, I took a 1/2 inch off the first time. It still wasn't enough, so I took another 1/2 inch. Place that in there. Oh, it's perfect now. Okay. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I have it set, you know, on your side corners in there, tucked up underneath there. It lays flat at the bottom. You could use it or not use it. I like it for the stabilization. So this is the pocketed one finished. Right here, it's got the pocket in the front. Okay. I finished the blue. I used the same white fabric that's inside for my binding on it. Okay. I think that one came out really pretty. And the one with the batiks, with the braided design on the front, I used the same, to bind it, I used the same fabric as my handles. And I also think that came out really cute. You know, the great things about these shopper totes, they don't have to just be for grocery bags. They could be for travel, great things to, you know, keep in your car, projects, whatever. So, but I know that there's a lot of videos in this, and we did do some extra things, like I quilted it on the long arm machine. However, if you were not going to quilt them or just was going to use your sewing machine, you could get all 3 of these bags done in a day from start to finish if you started, you know, first thing in the morning and got done. It just took a long time because I have to move the camera and do all those kind of things. So it took me a few days to get through quilting and sewing, piecing and sewing and all that wonderful stuff. So, but they are so much fun, guys, especially if you're new to sewing and you just want to learn. It's all by the number. So they're really, really easy to do. So that's it for this video. Join me next time. My next project is going to be an oversized baby quilt. It's actually a lap quilt that I'm doing as a baby quilt. It's oversized so they can lay it in the lawn, let baby play, or in the living room, or what have you. And it's a little bit bigger than the crib size. So, so join me next time. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Until then, plenty of hugs, loves, and blessings. Mwah. Bye, guys.